A
I
violent
told you
biker
to mind
publicly
your own
struck a
business. Now stay
78-year-old
on the
widow,
floor.
knocking her to the diner floor as dozens of people watched in silence, too afraid to move,
I
too
told you to
scared to
mind your own
speak.
business.
He laughed, convinced he ruled this small town, certain no one would ever challenge him. But he made one fatal mistake. He didn't know the woman he humiliated was the mother of a Navy SEAL, and that her son and his canine partner were about to walk through that door. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story of courage and faith touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories like this. Autumn arrived early in Pine Hollow, Colorado, with gold leaves whispering over cold water and a sky so clear it felt like a held breath. Margaret Maggie Wilson stepped out of the rental SUV and paused, one hand resting on the door as if steadying not her balance, but her thoughts. At 78, she was small-boned and straight-backed, her white hair pinned into a practical bun that revealed a fine, thoughtful face, and eyes the pale blue of distant weather. Widowhood had etched patience into her posture, not weakness. She wore a knitted cardigan the color of oatmeal, sensible shoes, and a calm expression that people often mistook for surrender. In truth, Maggie had learned long ago that still water could wear down stone. Before her stood the cabin on Lake Serenity, dark cedar siding, wide windows, and a porch that looked west toward the water. The lake lay smooth and cold, reflecting aspens whose leaves burned gold and copper like metals from a quieter war. This place was Ethan's idea. Her son had bought it without ceremony, insisted she take the long vacation, and said only that she deserved a room with a view where mornings didn't rush her. Ethan Wilson was not present, but his absence carried weight. In his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, Ethan had the kind of athletic build that came from discipline rather than vanity. His beard, when he let it grow, framed a square jaw and hid a faint scar along his chin, an old memory from a life he never described. He spoke softly, listened carefully, and moved with an economy that suggested decisions made once and executed cleanly. To Maggie, he was still the boy who used to line up his toy soldiers in careful rows. To the world, he was a Navy SEAL who believed love was best expressed through logistics. The cabin smelled of fresh wood and lemon oil. Ethan had stocked the fridge, labeled cupboards in tidy handwriting, and left a note on the counter, short, affectionate, and precise. Maggie read it twice, folded it, and slipped it into her pocket. She took a slow walk through the rooms, noticing how sunlight pooled on the floor, how silence here felt earned. Peace, she thought, should not feel like a debt. Outside, Pine Hollow hummed at a distance. The town was small enough that the grocery clerk remembered names, and large enough to have opinions. On Main Street, flags fluttered, shop windows advertised pie and bait, and smiles came easily, until they didn't. Maggie had felt it during her first walk, a friendliness that paused a beat too long, questions that drifted toward the lake and the cabin as if by accident. She answered politely, the way she always had, filing away impressions without alarm. Later that afternoon, she met Sarah Collins at the mailbox by the road. Sarah was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with sun-browned skin, chestnut hair cut to her shoulders, and eyes that flicked quickly from lake to tree line. She wore hiking boots and a denim jacket, patched at the elbows, the uniform of someone who fixed things herself. Sarah smiled warmly, but the smile carried a crease of caution. She welcomed Maggie, offered homemade bread, and spoke of weather patterns and road conditions. Only once did her voice dip. "Some people around here don't like change," she said, as if discussing frost. "Most of us do our best to keep the peace." That night, Maggie sat on the porch with a blanket and listened to water lap against the shore. She thought of her husband, gentle, steady, who had taught her that dignity could be armor. She felt the old ache of loss and the newer gratitude of being cared for from afar. She also felt, beneath it all, a thin wire of awareness tightening. Towns, like families, had habits. Some habits protected, others punished. Across the lake, an engine growled briefly and faded. Somewhere in Pine Hollow, plans were being measured in board feet and signatures. Maggie did not know names yet, did not know the shape of the shadow moving toward her quiet. She only knew that the lake was beautiful, the cabin was solid, and she would not be hurried. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find the diner she'd been told about, the one with good coffee and a window seat. The night cooled, leaves fell, and Pine Hollow, smiling in daylight, counted its steps in the dark. Morning settled over Pine Hollow with a fragile calm. the kind that made even the clatter of dishes sound respectful. Maggie Wilson walked the short distance from her parked car to the mountaintop diner, her steps unhurried, her breath visible in the chill. The diner sat at the corner of Main Street like a faithful old dog, brick walls, wide windows fogged with steam, and a neon sign that buzzed softly as if clearing its throat before speaking. Inside, warmth wrapped around her immediately. Coffee, bacon, buttered toast, scents that belonged to a different America, one Maggie remembered from decades earlier. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, their surfaces cracked with age but scrubbed clean. A few regulars sat hunched over plates, shoulders angled inward, voices low. When Maggie entered, heads lifted briefly. Eyes measured her, then dropped again. It wasn't hostility, it was caution. Behind the counter stood Emily Harper, the morning waitress, early 20s, average height with a sturdy build shaped by long shifts on her feet. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, freckles dusting her nose and cheeks. Emily had kind eyes but carried herself with the guarded efficiency of someone who had learned not to invite trouble. She smiled at Maggie, genuine but quick. "Seat anywhere you like, ma'am," she said, already reaching for a coffee pot. Maggie chose a booth by the window. She removed her cardigan carefully, folding it beside her, and rested her hands on the table. She noticed how conversation dipped a notch, how a man near the counter cleared his throat twice without speaking. Maggie had lived long enough to recognize a room holding its breath. The bell above the door rang again. This time, the sound did not fade politely into background noise. It carried weight. Rex Ripper Dalton stepped inside, bringing with him the sharp smell of gasoline and cold metal. He was in his early 50s, tall and heavy through the shoulders, his body thick with muscle that had gone soft around the middle. His shaved head reflected the diner lights, emphasizing a deeply lined face shaped by anger and indulgence. A gray-black beard framed his mouth, coarse and uneven, as if trimmed without care. He wore a black leather jacket, worn smooth at the elbows, with the unmistakable red and white Hell's Angels patch spread across his back. Devil wings flared, skull grinning. Rex's presence shifted the room instantly. Conversation stopped. Emily's smile vanished, replaced by a tight line. Rex moved like a man accustomed to space opening for him. Chairs scraped back, shoulders turned away. His eyes, small and sharp, scanned the diner not for friends but for leverage. He enjoyed being seen. Years earlier, a brief stint in county jail for assault had hardened his reputation, not corrected it. Since then, fear had done the rest of the work. Rex dropped into a booth near the counter, boots heavy on the tile. Two men followed him in, locals, thinner, quieter, faces etched with the look of people who laughed on cue. They slid in across from him without speaking. Rex's gaze drifted, layey and predatory, until it landed on Maggie. "Well now," he said, voice loud enough to travel. "That's new." Maggie felt the words before she processed them. She did not look up immediately. She had learned, raising a son alone and burying a husband too early, that attention was a currency bullies spent freely. She sipped her coffee instead, letting the heat ground her. Rex stood. The movement alone caused a ripple. Someone near the door shifted uncomfortably. Another patron stared into his plate with sudden devotion. Rex crossed the diner in slow strides and stopped beside Maggie's table, his shadow cutting across her hands. Up close, his breath smelled faintly of beer and mint gum. "You passing through, Grandma?" he asked, tone mockingly pleasant. "Or planning to stay?" Maggie looked up then. Her eyes met his, steadily pale blue and unflinching. "Just having breakfast," she replied. Her voice was calm, polite, and carried no invitation. Rex chuckled, a low sound that stirred nothing warm in the room. "Breakfast turns into lunch, lunch into paperwork. Funny how that happens around here." He glanced deliberately toward the window, in the direction of Lake Serenity. "Heard someone bought a nice piece of water recently." Emily hovered behind the counter, fingers tightening around a stack of plates. She knew this routine. Everyone did. Rex never came for eggs alone. "I'm sure lots of people own nice things," Maggie said. She returned her attention to the menu, a quiet dismissal that struck Rex harder than insult. Something flickered across his face, annoyance sharpened by surprise. People usually rushed to explain themselves to him, apologized, offered details. Maggie offered none. "You folks from the city always think manners make you untouchable," Rex said, leaning closer. The leather of his jacket creaked softly. "This town's got rules, traditions." Maggie folded the menu with care. Traditions should protect people, she said, still seated, still calm, not frighten them. The silence that followed felt brittle. Rex straightened slowly, jaw tightening beneath his beard. He smiled, but it was thin and humorless. "Enjoy your coffee," he said, "while you can." He turned back toward his booth, laughter erupting from his companions a half-second late. The diner exhaled, but the relief was incomplete, like a storm pausing rather than passing. Maggie finished her coffee. Her hands were steady, though her heart beat harder than she liked. She paid at the counter, thanked Emily, and stepped back into the cold sunlight. She did not know yet that this encounter was not an ending but a marker, the first visible crack in the peace she had been offered. Behind her, inside the diner, Rex Dalton watched the door with a calculating stare, already deciding his next move. The diner had not recovered its breath from the morning tension when Rex Dalton decided to return, and this time he did not bother pretending hunger. Maggie Wilson had risen from her booth with the quiet resolve of a woman who believed dignity was not something granted by crowds. She moved toward the counter to pay, her cardigan folded over her arm, her posture upright despite the weight pressing behind her ribs. The bell over the door did not ring. Rex was already inside, blocking the path as if the room itself had bent around him. Up close, the lines in his face deepened, carved by years of anger left to ferment. His beard bristled like wire, and the heavy rings on his fingers caught the fluorescent light with a dull, menacing gleam. He smiled as if sharing a private joke with the room, one no one else was brave enough to laugh at. "Thought about my offer?" Rex asked, voice pitched low but loud enough to travel. He planted a grease-stained knuckle on the counter, claiming territory. "Lakefront doesn't stay cheap. One signature, Maggie. Easy. You go back to knitting. Everyone stays happy." Maggie looked at him fully now. She did not step back. Her eyes, pale and steady, searched his face not for threat, but for the place where reason might have once lived. She found none and accepted that fact without fear. "The house isn't for sale," she said. "My son bought it for peace, not profit." The word son drew a ripple through the room. A man at the far booth shifted. Emily Harper, still behind the counter, felt her throat tighten. She was young, but she had learned the math of power here. Rex plus attention equaled trouble. She glanced toward the door, toward nothing that could help. Rex laughed, the sound brittle. "Your son," he repeated, savoring it. "The one who never shows his face. Drops cash and leaves you to deal with the locals. That son?" He leaned closer, the leather of his jacket creaking, the devil wings on his back invisible but present, like a threat spoken aloud. "This town doesn't like absentee owners. It confuses people." Maggie set a few bills on the counter with deliberate care. She turned slightly, preparing to leave. "I don't confuse fear with tradition," she said, "and I don't reward it." The refusal was gentle. That was what broke him. Rex's smile collapsed into something He swept his arm across the counter, sending a ceramic mug skidding into the air. Coffee splashed, dark and hot, against the wall and floor, droplets striking Maggie's hand. The crash rang out, sharp as a gunshot. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The room became a still photograph. Forks paused, mouths open, eyes wide. Maggie gasped, more startled than hurt, and stumbled. She felt the sudden cold of vulnerability, the way balance could vanish in a blink. Rex saw it and mistook it for permission. He drew his hand back, gold ring flashing, and struck. The sound of the slap cut through the diner, flat and final. Maggie cried out, the impact spinning her sideways. Her heel caught a chair leg, and she fell to the floor, breath knocked loose, cheek burning where his hand had landed. Silence followed, heavier than any shout. It pressed down on Maggie as she lay on the cold tile, the smell of coffee and bacon, suddenly nauseating. She heard her own breathing, quick and uneven. She saw shoes, boots, the hem of Emily's apron, but no one stepping forward. Fear had a way of freezing people into furniture. Rex stood over her, chest puffed, eyes bright with triumph and disbelief at his own audacity. He had crossed a line and felt powerful for it. In the corner, a middle-aged man with a baseball cap, Tom Avery, a retired mechanic with oil still under his nails, gripped the edge of his table until his knuckles went white. He had once intervened years ago, broken a finger for his trouble, and learned what the town called wisdom. He stayed seated. Emily's hands shook. Her phone, propped low behind the napkin holder, continued recording, unnoticed. Her face burned with shame and anger, emotions too big for her body to contain. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to be braver than the people she had grown up watching fail each other. Maggie pushed herself up on one elbow. The pain in her cheek throbbed, but what hurt more was the knowledge settling in. This was not just about land. This was about reminding the town who was allowed to stand tall. She looked around at the averted gazes, the rigid backs. She did not blame them. She understood fear. She had lived with it after her husband died, learned how it could hollow out good intentions. Rex took a step back, satisfied. "Accidents happen," he said lightly, already shaping the story. "You should watch your step." No one contradicted him. The bell above the door remained silent. Maggie gathered herself, refusing to cry, refusing to plead. She did not yet know who would answer this violence or when. She only knew that something irreversible had occurred. The diner had witnessed it. The town had chosen quiet, and silence, she understood as she steadied herself on the floor, could wound deeper than a hand ever could. The bell above the diner door rang with a clean, ordinary sound that did not match the shift it caused. Ethan Wilson stepped inside as if the room had been waiting for him without knowing why. He wore a dark green flannel shirt, sleeves down, worn jeans, and boots scuffed at the toes. Nothing about his clothes announced authority, yet his posture did. Ethan was tall and broad through the shoulders, lean rather than bulky, with a trimmed beard outlining a square jaw and a faint scar near his chin that caught the light when he turned. His eyes were a clear, unblinking blue, calm in a way that suggested storms had already taught them their lessons. At his side sat Shadow, a German shepherd just past 5 years old. His black and tan coat was glossy and dense, ears erect, body coiled but still. Shadow did not bark or bare his teeth. He sat with the patience of a professional, gaze fixed on Rex Dalton, as if distance were a calculation, not a guess. Ethan took in the scene in a single sweep: the shattered mug, the coffee on the floor, his mother on the tile with a red mark blooming along her cheek. His face did not change. He crossed the space between them and knelt beside Maggie, one hand steady at her elbow, the other hovering until she nodded that she was all right. "Mom," he said quietly. His voice was low and even, a tone reserved for trust. Maggie met his eyes and found there what she needed: control without cruelty, resolve without noise. Rex shifted. For the first time, his bravado faltered. Up close, the biker's bulk seemed less certain, his rings suddenly heavy on his fingers. He opened his mouth, to explain, to joke, to own the moment. Ethan rose. He placed himself between Rex and Maggie without touching him, without threatening him, simply occupying the space like a wall that had always been there. "Step back," Ethan said. The words were soft, precise. Shadow responded to a barely audible cue. He moved forward one measured pace, shoulders low, eyes locked. The message was unmistakable and silent. No further. The diner exhaled, but no one spoke. The door opened again, slower this time. Sheriff Hank Mercer entered with the practiced ease of a man who believed he could smooth anything flat. He was in his late 50s, tall but stooped, gray at the temples, his mustache neatly trimmed. His uniform fit like habit rather than pride. "All right, folks," Mercer said, palms out, voice friendly and thin. "Let's calm things down." His eyes flicked to Rex with familiarity, then to Ethan with uncertainty. "This is an assault," Ethan said. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Mercer yet. "I want a report filed." Mercer sighed, the sound rehearsed. "Looks like a misunderstanding that got out of hand," he replied. "No need to make a mess of it." Ethan turned then, and the assessment landed. "My mother was struck and knocked to the floor," Ethan said. "There are witnesses." He nodded once toward the room. "There's video." Across the street, Tyler Brooks adjusted his camera with shaking hands and a widening grin. In his late 20s, slim, sandy-haired beneath a knit beanie, Tyler carried the restless belief that stories could still matter. He had come to film a charming diner for his travel vlog. He had not expected history. Inside, Mercer noticed the phone in Emily Harper's hand, held low now, steady, no longer hiding. The room no longer felt frozen. It felt watchful. Rex did not laugh this time. He stepped back. Then another step. His hands lifted, palms out, as if innocence could be borrowed. Ethan helped Maggie to her feet. "We're leaving," he told Mercer. "I expect a case number before the day ends." He gave Shadow a single word: "Heel." The dog returned instantly, sitting at Ethan's side, eyes never leaving Rex until distance made it unnecessary. At the door, Maggie paused. She looked at the faces she had seen earlier, The fear, the shame, the quiet relief that someone else had stood up. She said nothing. Outside, the mountain air cut clean and sharp. Ethan settled his mother into the passenger seat of his truck, checked her cheek with careful fingers, then closed the door. Across the street, Tyler's camera captured the final frame. A son standing guard, a dog at his knee, and a town beginning, slowly, to understand the cost of silence. The video did what truth often does when given light. It moved faster than fear. By nightfall, it had crossed state lines, then oceans, carrying with it the sharp clarity of a slap, a fall, and a room that chose silence until it could no longer afford to. Ethan Wilson watched the numbers climb on a borrowed laptop at the cabin, while Shadow lay at his feet, chin on paws, eyes open. Maggie sat wrapped in a blanket, cheek bruised, hands folded, absorbing the strange weight of becoming a symbol when all she had wanted was quiet. By morning, Pine Hollow felt watched. Not by ghosts or gossip, but by consequence. Black SUVs idled at the edge of town like punctuation marks at the end of a long sentence. Men and women in plain jackets moved with practiced efficiency, faces neutral, voices low. Special Agent Marissa Cole arrived first, early 40s, medium height, athletic build, dark hair pulled into a severe knot that made her angular cheekbones more pronounced. Her eyes were sharp and patient, the kind that listened longer than they spoke. Years in financial crimes had taught her that corruption preferred polite rooms and soft hands. She introduced herself with a nod, accepted the footage without ceremony, and asked Maggie how her cheek felt. Maggie answered honestly and without embellishment. That mattered. The names surfaced quickly. Grant Caldwell, the developer, was tall and immaculate, silver hair cut close, suits tailored to project restraint rather than wealth. He smiled like a man accustomed to being thanked for harm done at a distance. Mayor Walter Boone appeared genial in public. Ruddy cheeks, thinning hair, laugh lines cultivated for cameras, but privately favored closed doors and favors traded in inkless ledgers. Sheriff Hank Mercer, who had hoped routine would save him, learned that routine does not withstand records. The town's secrets, once insulated by familiarity, now had strangers reading them aloud. The most unexpected knock came from Linda Boone. She arrived at the cabin alone, late afternoon, posture careful, coat buttoned too tight. Linda was in her early 60s, slender, with silver blonde hair worn in a precise bob, and skin that bore the fine lines of a life spent managing appearances. Her eyes, however, were tired in a way mirrors could not fix. She asked to speak to Maggie privately. Ethan agreed, remaining within earshot without hovering. Shadow stayed seated, a quiet metronome of calm. Linda's voice shook only once as she placed a small black USB drive on the table. "I've watched him make deals for years," she said, fingers interlaced to stop their tremor. "I told myself it was progress. Then I saw your face on that floor." She looked at Maggie, shame and resolve, sharing space. "This is everything I could gather. Ledgers, emails, recordings." Maggie covered the drive with her hand, feeling its lightness and its gravity. She did not thank Linda. She simply nodded, a recognition of courage long delayed, but not too late. The rest unfolded with the inevitability of weather. Warrants, arrests, doors opened, with badges held steady. Mayor Boone resigned before noon and was indicted by dusk. Sheriff Mercer was escorted out of his office, past neighbors, who suddenly remembered how to stand upright. Grant Caldwell's jet was stopped on the tarmac 2 counties away. He argued politely until he couldn't. Rex Dalton watched it all from a distance that felt unfamiliar. The leather jacket with devil wings stayed on his back, but it no longer carried the room. He was questioned, charged, and released pending trial, his authority reduced to a name in a file. For the first time, he looked smaller than his reflection. Pine Hollow did not heal in a single day. It rarely does. But it began. The mountaintop diner changed hands when the owner chose safety over silence. Emily Harper was offered a manager's role she had never imagined, her freckles bright with a smile that reached her eyes. Sarah Collins organized a town meeting, standing tall in her denim jacket, chestnut hair catching the light, voice steady as she spoke about oversight and memory. Tom Avery fixed a fence for a neighbor he had avoided for years and did not ask for payment. Small things accumulated. Ethan declined interviews. He helped where asked and left when finished. Shadow became a familiar sight on Main Street, children approaching him cautiously, then with confidence. He accepted their hands with dignified patience, tail low, presence firm. People said the town felt different when he was near, as if boundaries remembered their purpose. On the evening the last SUV departed, Maggie sat on the porch and watched the lake hold the sky. The bruise had faded to yellow. She thought of her husband, of the long arc of choices that had brought her here, of how strength sometimes looked like refusal, and sometimes like witness. Ethan joined her, silent, and she took his hand. They did not speak of heroism or revenge. They spoke of breakfast plans and the weather. Rex Dalton stood alone by the water later, jacket unzipped, wind cold against his neck. Power had taught him many things, none of them durable. He would face what came next without applause. Redemption, if it arrived, would do so without spectacle. Pine Hollow learned its lesson slowly and kept it close. Authority fades, fear lies, and justice does not always roar. Sometimes it simply shows up, sits down, and refuses to look away. Sometimes miracles do not arrive like thunder. They arrive quietly, wearing ordinary clothes, walking into ordinary places, choosing to stand when it would be easier to look away. In Pine Hollow, there was no angel descending from the sky. There was only a widow who refused to surrender her dignity, a son who came home not to seek revenge, but to protect, and a town that slowly remembered what courage looks like. The Bible tells us that light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That day, light did not roar, it simply stayed. Perhaps that is how God works most often in our lives. Not through sudden miracles that erase pain, but through people who become his hands when pain appears, through strangers who choose truth, through moments when fear whispers stay silent, and something deeper whispers bacon, stand firm. Everyday life gives us these moments, at a grocery store, in a workplace, in a family argument. When we see someone being treated unfairly and must decide, do we pass by or do we step forward? This story is not only about Maggie, Ethan, or Shadow, it is about us. If you have ever felt small in the face of injustice, remember this: God does not measure strength by size or volume. He measures it by faithfulness. And sometimes, the greatest miracle is not that evil is loud, but that good endures. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us which character's quiet strength spoke to you the most. Subscribe to the channel so more stories of courage, faith, and redemption can reach those who feel alone. And may God bless every one of you watching. May He give you courage when you are afraid, wisdom when the path is unclear, and peace when the world feels loud. May He guide your steps, protect those you love, and remind you every day that light still wins. Amen.